You know, some folks like me really make a habit of developing these hyperfixations about really specific topics, and it can suck a little when you jump from disparate topic to disparate topic and eventually end up with a wastebasket of interests that truly don't add up to anything. So, what is there to do? Well, you Frankenstein them all into a YouTube video series. I really like VTubers. I'm sure you can tell I am one. It's a truly fascinating medium for content creation and artistic expression, and it has fostered many incredible communities over the years. But that is far from the only thing I've ever had a passion for. If anything, it's tertiary. 3D modeling is also one of them. How I developed this one I would rather not share. But even before these two, since I was still a wee baby, I've had one thing that I've loved my whole life, and that is biology. So after a lot of daydreaming, I eventually came up with an idea that can unite all of these into a, hopefully, video series. Vzoo. The premise is, well, complicated, very complicated, but I will explain. Basically, I take a VTuber, and I take into account all the design, lore, IRL, and other elements of them as a character, and as a content creator, and try to translate all of them into a fictional animal species, complete with a design, description of its ecology, taxonomic classification, and even the time period in which it lives, lived, or will live. All of which reflecting the original VTuber. Then I go into Blender and model, texture, rig and pose it, all the while I show you my process and explain my reasoning. Maybe even teach you an animal fact or two. You got that? Good, let's go. Hey, bitch, we gotta do some housekeeping first. As it turns out, VTuber animals are a lot more complicated than you might expect. Starting with the VTuber part, there are already a lot of VTubers, the majority even, that are already based on animals. In some cases, pretty much the entire design being focused entirely on the animal in question. But even the ones which simply have a pair of animal ears and a tail definitely fall within this category. So, for originality's sake, I have decided to disqualify all of these VTubers. On the other hand, there is a myriad of VTubers that are very much not based on non-human animals, or are at least based on non-animal organisms. They are perfectly fit for the series. So, animal VTubers are disqualified. Is that all? Well, no. Because as it turns out, there is a whole spectrum of VTubers between these two categories that don't really fit either one. For an example, Gerard is a T-Rex. Can you tell? He, along with many others, fall within this weird category where they are officially based on a real animal species, but simply don't reflect that in their design that much. On the opposite side, you have VTubers that are stated to be human, but have very clear animal inspirations in articles of clothing and even their names. And there are even VTubers that are very much animalistic in their design, but don't seem to be based on a specific IRL taxon. So all of these will be put in this middle spectrum, and you can see for yourself which are acceptable and which are not. Now that the VTuber part is out of the way, let's cover the animal part. Now, I know it might seem kinda dumb for me to be asking the question, what is an animal? I mean, we've all seen animals before, it couldn't be that hard to tell, right? Well, evidently not, because I've seen quite a few folks that are willing to claim that this is not an animal, or this was definitely this. They'd probably claim this one is an alien, and this one a rock. This one might be closer to you than the previous one. This one's just straight up your cousin. Bet you didn't know these could move. Yep, still an animal. That's not a jellyfish. And that's not a clam. You only know this one because it's hard to kill. This one's hardy too, but I bet you didn't know it. This little lady had her first baby the day she was born. This one's just cute, come on. How draconic. Oxygen is overrated. That's just unfortunate.
Demon.
Okay, I can forgive this one. We found this chap in the Moby Dick. They not teach you to keep your butthole away from your mouth, be like your cousin. This one is... Really? Did you have to do it in the shot? I don't know what that is. The point I am trying to make here is that animal can mean a lot of stuff, okay? When we choose an animal to base off a VTuber, we have a lot of material to work with. And that also poses a bit of a complication, You see, it'd be admittedly kinda dumb for us to make up some completely new type of organism and just say it's an animal. That would take away from the creative exercise. So I have decided that while we can use any, it is needed for our fictional animal to fall within an existing smaller taxonomic group. Specifically, I landed on the Linnaean order, one of the 8 traditional taxonomic ranks. It's smack dab in the middle between kingdom and species, and generally speaking, orders tend to have the perfect mix of both being broad enough to allow for a lot of creative room, and being restricted enough that we don't risk going into fantasy creature territory. To give an example, Coleoptera is the order which contains beetles, and it is the single most diverse one on the planet, with some 25% of all animal species falling within this group. In spite of this, however, pretty much all beetles are very easily identifiable as beetles, thanks to them being insects with hardened forewings or elytra, and holometabolous development, with larva and imago stages. Outside of this order rule, I will call it, we have total freedom. Any animal is fair game, including anthropogenic ones, i.e. ones made by humans, and extinct taxa or even speculative future taxa. And with that, we have a pretty robust set of criteria for our creative exercise. So, without any further ado, ladies, gentlemen, and all the folks in between, I want a round of applause for the Queen of Twitch and Health herself, this thing. IronMouse was probably the first VTuber to pop into my head when I first conceptualized this whole series. One, because she has an animal in her name, which is not enough to disqualify her, but it did make her kind of an obvious choice. 2, I am a crowd-chasing shill. In all honesty though, making her a literal iron mouse will be boring. Not just because it's blatantly uncreative, but because there are already rodents that heavily incorporate iron into their enamel to the point of staining their teeth red. It'd be really dumb if I just made a small beaver or something. So instead I turned to her lore as inspiration. Iron Mouse is Satan. Like, literally Satan, Lucifer Morningstar, the devil from the Bible. She is that devil. And one of the most defining characteristics of Lucifer as a character archetype is his fall, a once higher being which, due to his pride and hubris, is sent down into the lowest, most miserable plane of existence, where he stays because he refuses to submit to the Lord's glory. So a creature in a high place that then permanently goes to a lower place? That sounds to me like secondary flightlessness. You know, an animal that was capable of powered flight in the past but lost that ability. And I already brought up mice. A mouse that is flightless but was once flying. A flying mouse. A bat! Bats are, in many different languages, including my own, Bulgarian, colloquially referred to as flying mice. Of course, that is entirely inaccurate, bats are closer to whales than to mice, but I digress. However, it's not just the mirrored nomenclature that serves as a connection. Bats, courtesy of their occasionally ghoulish appearance, tendency to roost in rather underworld-esque places, and the habit of just a few species to drink blood, are sometimes associated with the nefarious and the demonic, even if to a lesser extent than something like snakes or goats. I mean, that's where demons get their wings from, including Tungsten Rat. But there are a few other more personal reasons why this works. You may be aware that bats are pretty damn good disease carriers, with rabies, Ebola, Marburg, Hendra, Nipah, and various types of sores, possibly including COVID-19, all being transmitted by them. However, what you might not know is the reason why bats are even able to handle all of those pathogens. The metabolic costs of powered flight, alongside the frequent exposure to pathogens in crowded environments, has forced bats to evolve a uniquely robust immune system alongside other abilities such as a greater capability of cells to repair their DNA. And for as much as bats can cause viral outbreaks, their adaptations have also given valuable insight into fighting those very viruses and even other diseases like cancer. As it turns out, there is a parallel here with IronMouse. She rather notoriously has common variable immunodeficiency, a condition which limits her body's ability to handle pathogens. In spite of this, however, she has built an incredible career and has even used her platform to spread awareness about her condition and even support agencies such as the Immune Deficiency Foundation. So, a small, gremlin-looking creature that lives in caves, has demonic connotations, an unusual immune system, and has helped save people's lives. There you have it. A flightless bat it is. God damn it. Okay, so here's the problem. Bats are very diverse. They are the most specious order of mammals after rodents, with some 1500 species. That's 20% of all known mammals, and they are found on all continents except Antarctica and just a few islands. And yet, not one species is fully flightless, which is weird, right? If we look at the two other groups of extant flying animals, the majority of insect orders have flightless members, and birds have lost flight over 150 times. Rails alone have done so 30. So why have bats not done so too? Well, it probably has to do with the fact that bats' wing surface is made up of both their forelimbs and their hind limbs, unlike the other two. And their hind limbs are pretty whacked out in terms of their joint orientation and stuff, so losing flight is not as evolutionarily viable for them. But we will ignore this because we're making VTuber animals. We are not scientists, we are nerds. So, for real this time, let's get to actually modeling the creature. Roll the B-roll. This is the second part of the video. It will pretty much just be a really long time lapse of my modeling process for the creature. I will occasionally pop back in to offer some commentary and to maybe add in an extra fact or maybe comment on something that I did while I was creating the model, but for the most part it will just be you watching my process of making the animal. Now, when I was actually deciding on what species of bat I wanted to base this new animal off of, I actually had a couple of different options. One of my first ideas was actually to base it off a flying fox, mostly because I just think of them as sort of like the most charismatic of the bats, the ones that the majority of people would like the most, and I thought that would be very fitting for IronMouse. However, flying foxes are actually only found in the old world, and I wanted this bat species to actually be in Puerto Rico, since that is the home country of IronMouse. Actually, I don't think it's entirely its own country. I think there was some like shenanigans with the US and stuff like that. But point is, it's her home island, and I wanted to reflect that in the actual species. So I decided to look up various species of New World bats, and I eventually stumbled upon sackwing bats, which are basically these small little species of bats that are defined by having small little glands in their wings, which can produce a strong smell, which allows them to find each other in the dark, which is the reason why they're called sackwing bats. Now, sackwing bats aren't actually native to Puerto Rico either, but they are found on mainland South and Central America. So it's not like it's unreasonable to think that a species of sackwing bats could end up living on Puerto Rico and evolving into this flightless species. Plus, after I realized that they are not native to Puerto Rico, I was already deep into the modeling process, and I didn't want to make up some completely different type of bat when I was already modeling it. as you're watching the time lapse, you might notice a bunch of these very weird jumps between frames, where in one moment the model is in a certain state of completion, and in the other it is completely different. And the reason for this is that this entire time lapse is actually stitched together from multiple different modeling sessions. When I made the model, I had plenty of times where I would, pause the modeling process because I wanted to do something else or had to do something else. And sometimes I just had to take breaks and record things in different parts. And so I had to take the time to take all of these different recordings and stitch them together, which was really hard. Which is why there are a lot of places in which instead of taking the time to add transitions and other stuff, I just kind of have the video snap to another one without any real indication. It's gonna get quite a bit confusing with time, I am sure, but I will try in future uploads of the series to maybe up the editing and add transitions so it doesn't look as jarring. Just so you know, when you see it, in if it confuses you, that's why. I am sure you have noticed by now that all the models I make are low poly. I actually don't have that much experience making actually high fidelity models because I'm just kind of specialized in this sort of, I guess, totally accurate battle simulator looking art style. And this is why, unlike with a lot of other 3D artists that in this stage would just be making a simple block out of the mesh, I am actually adding in the important geometry from the start. You can see right now in this footage, I am adding the joints, which are really damn important in these 3D models. You don't want to have just stiff seams and edges in places where the model is supposed to bend and twist, because then you get a lot of clipping, and that's why you have to add these little bits and bobs. It's really damn difficult sometimes to predict how the model will bend and how it will respond to different, poses and stuff like that. But it can be very satisfying after a while to finally get it and to get something that really moves around like it's a, consistent physical object and not just some simulation in a computer. It took me quite a while to really settle on what I wanted the feet of this animal to look like. The back feet, as you've seen already, are typical of bats. where they have mostly fingers of equal length with prominent claws that are usually used for gripping and holding on to walls and to branches and stuff. In bats, those feet are often pretty bent because of the morphology of their joints, but I imagine that in this hypothetical flightless bat, they might go back to a much more typical mammal pose to allow it to walk normally on the ground. As for the forelegs, which are admittedly much more interesting, I settled on sort of exaggerating the pose that you see in vampire bats, which actually spend a lot of their time on the ground. They walk entirely on just a single thumb because that's the only finger they have that isn't used to form the wing. And as a result, I kind of decided that in a flightless species, what would probably happen is that all the regular fingers would get reduced to basically just these little nubs, while the major thumb, which is actually used for walking, will basically become sort of like a hoof, which looks really weird because there's just not an animal today which has this sort of morphology, but I would assume it's the most likely outcome for such a strange animal. One of the reasons why I actually gravitated towards sackwing bats for this animal is because of their snouts. See, in echolocating bats, there's usually two types of ways of achieving echolocation. There is schnoz trumpeters, as I like to call them, which are those that generate noise with their nostrils. And this is the reason why many bats have these weird sort of leaf-shaped noses and kind of very ridgy faces. It helps to focus the sounds they produce with their nasal cavity. While in other bats, such as in sackwing bats, they are screamers, meaning that they produce all the noise they need through their mouth, so their noses are a lot more normal. And I didn't want to base this species on a bat with a very weird face morphology just because, in my opinion, that just didn't really fit IronMouse's design that much, which is why I picked this one. And it will also become very important because the nose of this particular animal actually has pretty important implications for the design later on, but you will see that in the texturing section. I mentioned earlier in the first half of the video that goats are often considered a symbol of Satan. So I decided it'd be an interesting idea to give this animal very goat-looking eyes with these sorts of wide irises. This is not something that is exclusive to ungulates, goats, deer, stuff like that. Interestingly enough, mongooses also have these sorts of eyes, which really surprised me when I found it out because they just don't really look like the type of animal that would have them. But I wanted to do the same thing with this bat species. Maybe as it evolved to live on the ground, it needed a wider field of view to look out for predators, leading to this weird sort of eye morphology. The irises on all of my models are kind of just separate meshes that float inside the eye socket. I don't make actual fully modeled eyes that are spheres like in most typical models. I use the method that is usually used for MMD models and for typical anime models, where the eye is just a socket with a emission shader inside, and the iris is just a model floating inside of it. It's not obvious from this time lapse, but it took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out how to do the mouth. I had already cut out the head shape for the animal, and I didn't want to change it, so I had to figure out a way how to sort of chisel out a mouth cavity and a jaw from an existing head shape. And it took me a really long time to really figure out how to do so. Eventually, I sort of settled on just cutting out a seam in the face and then dividing it and just making a mouth cavity from that. The model wouldn't really be used for that much, so it didn't need to be super complicated. I didn't even plan on really making the animal with a prominent mouth or with an open mouth, so it didn't really matter. It just needed to be a little bit of movement over there, just so it's visible that it actually has a mouth. I really hope you don't find it bothersome that this part of the video is entirely unscripted. I know I'm kind of mumbling a lot and just sort of going off, but I wanted to have this be a bit more of a down-to-earth explanation of what I'm doing and of my craft. So just sit back and enjoy it. You're probably wondering what's the deal with these things I am modeling on the side of the creature. Well, those are essentially tufts of fur. You see, one of the most defining features of IronMouse in her at least standard design is her twin tails. They are very big, very prominent, very iconic, very important to her silhouette, and I wanted to reflect that in the design of the creature. But it'd be pretty ridiculous to just give it actual literal twin tails. So instead, what I settled on is actually having them around the arms. After all, in IronMouse's design, usually her twin tails are separated with these hair clips that have bat wings on them, or I guess demon wings in this case. So by having the little hair tufts essentially coming out of the, I guess, armpit of the creature, it would actually sort of have the same position. You know, it's a tuft of fur coming out of the wing, but in this case, because the wing is actually the arm instead of in the hair, and because it's formed in the form of a leg here, it results in this rather odd looking thing. I honestly, in hindsight, it really is a very bizarre looking design feature, but honestly, I kind of like it. I think it gives it a very interesting look. By this point, I have more or less finished the modeling process completely, but now I have to do something called UV unwrapping, which is basically this way of taking the 3D model, or specifically the polygons that make it up, and essentially projecting them on a flat plane. And by doing so, and by making this sort of 2D image of the model's topology, you can use it to project an existing image onto it. This is the basic way through which the textures on 3D models actually work. And so, because I want to obviously texture this model, I have to also unwrap it in this way. It can be quite annoying. It is very time consuming. In this time lapse, it is very much cut down, but it is important. And the end result is something which I can paint and color in all kinds of ways. So it is definitely worth it. I feel like a lot of people tend to overlook the importance of bells in IronMouse's design. They are a fairly prominent motif in a lot of her models, and they are implied to have some lore significance, as it is said that her powers are controlled to an extent by them. So I wanted to actually reflect that in the design, especially because I feel like that is something that is very much unique to her design in terms of designs for Satan in various forms of media. Like I can't think of another interpretation of the devil which has this sort of bell motif or something of that sort. In this case, I decided to specifically base the nose of her bell, which is why it is entirely gray and has this somewhat odd looking shape to it. I guess the idea is that the two nostrils are sort of connected through this indent between them, which gives out the impression of just one big hole like a regular bell. Though obviously it's not like it's some singular one giant weird looking nostril. It's just two nostrils that just look kind of interconnected. One very big issue I came across when texturing this creature is that, well, pink. Pink is the defining color of IronMouse. It is basically, without pink, she's basically not even the same design. And it is also something that cannot be found in mammals at all. We have very limited color in our fur, so it'd be very unrealistic for me to make a pet that is just straight up like a bright, saturated pink. So instead, what I settled for is more so a purplish color. Ironmouse does have some purplish elements to her, and there are certain mammals, such as the Indian giant squirrel, that definitely look a little purplish under certain angles and in certain environments. So I guess this is the closest to realistic that I could get. Although, even considering that, I definitely feel like this design has at least a little bit of a fantasy element to it. It definitely is a bit too purplish. I should definitely do a bit more practice in rendering low poly fur. Definitely. One thing I realized fairly late into the project is that I actually needed to come up with a name for the creature. Making up scientific names is like pretty easy. You just take a bunch of Greek and Latin words, just smash them together, a bunch of mumbo jumbo, really. But if you want to come up with a common name, it's actually more complicated because you have to take into account, for an example, the local culture and the local languages and the etymology of the word for the animal you're creating. And like there's a whole science around this stuff. So eventually I decided to keep it simple and just use existing local words. The indigenous language of Puerto Rico is Taino, and in Taino I was able to find some dictionaries, but I don't know how reliable they are. From what I was able to find, the word buya is a local word which means evil spirit or devil or something along those lines. And B is a prefix which essentially is used to make things littler. So sort of like the suffix hen, I think it was in German, or che in my language, Bulgarian, or ink in English, just a way of making something appear smaller, like a somethingling. I don't know what word to use in English. Um, and basically, that's just kind of the name I come up with. It's Bibuya, a little evil spirit or little devil, because I wanted this creature to sort of have like a sort of evil, mischievous monster mythology around it, to sort of fit the demonic vibe. played Monster Hunter, you might have noticed how a lot of different creatures seem to have the exact same animations. This is because all of them share the same rig. A rig is basically a skeleton for a model. You can make a rig to fit a certain model and then assign different parts of it to be controlled by different bones. In this way, you can obviously use a rig to animate the model and make it move around. So what I do here is that I take a pre-made quadruped model, fit it to the size of the creature I have made here, and then take the time to weight paint the individual vertices to be controlled by different bones. There are a lot of people who use Blender and animate and make models who absolutely despise weight painting, and I can definitely see where they're coming from. But I think because I work with generally more low poly models, it's not nearly that exhausting for me. At least usually. Sometimes it definitely is a bit of a pain. The Bibuya. Bibuyas are a small species of flightless bat in the family Emballonuridae. They are roughly 30 centimeters long from head to tail, with a remarkably purplish coat and gray highlights. They are endemic to the island of Puerto Rico, and as a result of deforestation and the introduction of invasive species, they are considered vulnerable to extinction. They are mostly nocturnal, although seldom seen during dusk or dawn. They prefer to dwell in densely forested habitats, but are known to venture onto beaches as well. They have an unusually high metabolism for an animal of their size and feed frequently on a range of small animals and fruit. They themselves are prey for native snakes and birds, but also introduced house cats. They are hosts to a range of parasites, among them bat flies, and are suspected to act as natural reservoirs for a number of zoonotic pathogens. Their name comes from the native Taino word for little devil, and stems from the belief that they are omens of bad luck. Thank you for watching, and see you another time. Oh, by the way, my name is Bor.